Welcome to RCC at Home. Today we're not only starting a brand new series, we're in a brand new location. I'd like to welcome you to Greer and my home. This series is going to go for 5 weeks, and today's going to be kind of like an introduction where we talk about some of the generic battles that we all face in life. Now, I use that word battle with intention. I know it sounds aggressive. It comes across hostile. It's just throughout your life, throughout my life. Whether we want to admit it or not, we're going to go through seasons in our life where we face uphill battles. We're going to be putting all this energy, and it's going to feel like we're not getting a return. It's like raking water. A lot of work, but not much coming from it. Now, here's something I know that's universal to most of us. In our formative years, when something goes wrong, we had no problem finding someone else to blame. Mum, Dad, before you look at my report card, I want you to know that it's not my fault. Everyone in the class was just consistently mucking up. It's an impossible situation to learn in that classroom, Mum. I had a terrible teacher. He, they had it in for me from the start. Didn't matter what I did, it didn't matter what I say, I was never going to get a good grade. And if it wasn't my teacher, then it was my parents' fault. They didn't believe in me. They didn't provide a support mechanism that I needed. They showed favoritism to my brother, to my sister. There's always an endless supply of people we can blame. We even see that in sport. Young kids' team, they get beaten in sport. On the drive home in the back seat, you don't hear them saying, oh, how good was that team? No way, that's not what you hear at all. Oh, the ref was hopeless. They cheated. They played dirty. The closest the thing we hear that resembles good sportsmanship is, well, if our best player, Freddie, had been there, we would have beaten them for sure. The problem with that line of thinking, as long as you blame someone else, you're going to stay the same. You see, as long as you're blaming someone else, you don't need to change. The problem's not with you, it's with them. And if they've got the problem, you don't need to change. They're the one that needs to change. Now, don't get me wrong. There are people in your life that are going to cause you great grief and make you face battles you shouldn't have to face. Would you agree with me? Now, the hardest part of your job has very little to do with the work you have to do, but nearly everything it has to do with the people you have to work with. I think of the young David. We're talking about David who slew Goliath. That giant was not the only battle he had to face in life. He had to face the battle of his brothers who despised him and a father who ignored him. And those battles hung in his mind for a long time after he dealt with the giant Goliath. The Apostle Paul, who planted churches all over the Roman world, faced battle after battle after battle. And most of those battles came from people that went out of their way to make his life miserable. I know I'm the bearer of bad news, but make no mistake about it. There are people that take great joy in making our lives miserable. It's just in this series, we're not going to talk about the battles we face from other people. That leads me to the second area where we find conflict, where battles come our way. And that comes from what I call the world. Now, when I say the world, I don't mean the world like you watch when Bear Grylls gets dropped in the middle of an Amazonian jungle with nothing more than a pocket knife to fight off some crocodile-infested swamp or descend down some terrain that would put fear into the heart of a mountain lion. I'm not talking about the planet Earth we live in. I'm using that term world in the sense that John, Jesus' youngest disciple, does when he said, do not love this world nor the things it offers you. When John uses that term world, he's talking about a worldview that is hostile to the values of the kingdom of God that Jesus inaugurated. And that world will never stop trying to make you conform to its value system. It'll try to push you into its mold so that you think the way it thinks and you act the way it acts. It will try to push you into its mold so that you want the things it offers. And for the most part, that's not a problem. It's just every so often there will be what I call a clash of the kingdoms. A clash between what the world says is right and what God deems as right. A choice to follow Jesus invites conflict and complexity into our lives. If you don't believe me, if you're still single, tell someone who doesn't follow Christ that you're keeping yourself until you get married. They'll probably say something like, well, good for you, I'm glad for you, I hope it works out for you. But in your next breath, if you say, the reason I'm waiting is part of the process of living in a successful long-term relationship requires waiting. And if you say the reason I'm waiting is I don't want to sin against God, do that and you'll hear a total different tone. You'll hear things like, you Christians, you're so judgmental. You're so out of touch with reality. How dare you come across as being better than us? The world, like an avalanche, will try to push its values on you. And if you even give a hint of a godly value that conflicts with a worldly value, you'll be attacked. Sometimes that attack will be to your face. Sometimes it'll be behind your back. Whether it's to your face or behind your back is irrelevant. You will be attacked. They'll go out of their way to expose our every weakness. The fact of the matter is, as followers of Christ, we know we're not better than anyone. That's why we went to God. We need His grace. We need His power in us to do for us what we couldn't do for ourselves. And so the world brings difficulty. But that's not the battle we're going to talk about for the next 4 weeks. And of course, if we're going to talk about battles, it would be amiss of me not to mention the devil. He causes more strife and manipulation than we would like to care. Peter wrote a letter from Rome to Christians all over the world. At the time, Nero was the emperor of Rome, and he made it his goal to wipe Christianity off the map. It was in that setting that Peter said, "Stay alert. Watch out for your great enemy, the devil. He prowls around like a roaring lion, looking for someone to devour." Now, the thing about lions is they have a way of attacking the sick, the young, or the animal that strays from the pack. It makes me think we've got to be careful not to stray from our pack. And it's hard at this time with the COVID virus. It's hard to be in church. I urge you, connect with other believers who are going to protect you more than you could ever imagine. Peter warns us to watch out for Satan when we're suffering or being persecuted. He'll intensify whatever situation you're going through in an effort to keep you away from other believers. He wants so much to isolate you from the pack so he can have his way in your life and take something away that he's not meant to take away from you. He'll wait until you're a low point in life. He'll try to make something that's wrong seem attractive and something that is right seem, well, that's just old-fashioned and irrelevant. And so the devil brings difficulty. But that's not the battle we're going to talk about for the next 4 weeks. This area that we all battle with, we're going to camp in for the next 4 weeks. Paul, who wrote a whole bunch of books in the Bible, someone who God used to heal people and save people and restore people a lot. He started churches like crazy. He described this thing called the flesh, and that's the battle we want to talk about for the next week. He was constantly doing battle. Listen to this. For when we were in the realm of the flesh, the sinful passions aroused by the law were at work in us, so that we bore fruit for death. Paul uses this term flesh here to describe the rebellious nature that we all have to contend with. Whether we like it or not, as long as there's breath in our lungs, we'll have to battle this rebellious nature. It's called the flesh. And it would appear that when this letter was written, there were far too many followers of Christ in the city of Rome coming off second best in this battle. We don't know, maybe the Christians in Rome were hoping that Paul would say one of his magic prayers and make the battle go away. It's just he didn't say a magic prayer. And the battle's not going to go away. We have to crucify the flesh. Paul self-identifies with the very people that were coming off second best. And he said this, "For what I am doing, I do not understand, for I am not practicing what I would like to do, but I am doing the very thing I hate. But if I do the very thing I do not want to do, I agree with the law, confessing that the law is good." It wasn't that long ago that by the time people found out about cancer, it was nearly always too late. The first symptoms, it usually always led to very bad news from the doctors, where the doctor would say, "I'm sorry. There's nothing we can do but pray." If only we had found out about this sooner, we could have helped you. It's just in 1977, a man by the name of Raymond Damanian invented what we today call an MRI machine. This incredible machine probes into a person's flesh and provides a detailed image of his or her body. The specialist then looks at this image and can locate cancerous tumours long before the patient presents any symptoms. Now, when the MRI leads to a diagnosis of cancer, the patient doesn't blame the machine for the illness. That would just be silly. Even if the patient only has an ounce of wisdom, they're so grateful for the early detection so they can be treated. When Paul said, "But if I do the very thing I do not want to do, I agree with the law, confessing the law is good," he was saying God's law is the MRI machine. Paul is saying that the law, all those rules and regulations we find in the Old Testament, they expose the disease of sin that sits in my body. The bad news is the disease is deadly if not treated. Hey, the wages of sin, it's death. And we don't like to think about this, but every time we sin, something dies in our life. The good news is if you're prepared to go to battle this disease is completely curable. Paul continues with, so now no longer am I the one doing it, but sin which dwells in me. For I know that nothing good dwells in me, that is, in my flesh. For the willing is present in me, but the doing of the good is not. Inside you, inside me, there's this old nature that ruled your life before you decided to follow Jesus. And like a puppet being led by a puppeteer, the only time you didn't do what your flesh told you to do was when you feared getting caught out. But then a day came when you committed your life, you gave your life to Jesus Christ, and God gave you a new spirit on the inside. And that moment you entered a battle where the old you and the new you are battling for supremacy. The new you has a desire to please God and do the things He wants you to do. The problem is that the old nature is still there. It has no desire to please God. And as long as there's breath in your lungs, these two natures will never stop fighting each other. The challenge for us is to learn to live in the Spirit and not in the flesh. The challenge is not to let the old nature dominate the new nature. That's the challenge. All I know is, if I take time to do a stock take of my life, I know this. The flesh, my old nature, it's my worst enemy in my life. Now Paul goes on, he says, for the good that I want, I do not do, but I practice the very evil that I do not want. But I am doing the very thing I do not want. I am no longer the one doing it, but sin which dwells in me. The first battle that I want to talk about, and we're only going to scratch the surface of this battle today. Jason's going to get into do justice to this topic next week. I call this the emotional battle, or you could say the battle of the mind. Remember the last time you met someone in a foul mood? We all have them, don't we? I'm yet to meet a person who's never been in what I would call a foul mood or a bad mood. I liken a bad mood to a version of me that I don't like. There are so many things that can trigger a bad mood. Rejection, loss, an unexpected bill, a lack of sleep, starving your spirit to feed your flesh. Oh, that'll feed your flesh like you cannot believe. And guess what we do every time we take a week off church? We feed our flesh, we feed that bad mood. There are so many things that can bring on a bad mood. All I know is when I get in a bad mood, those walls go up and the enjoyment levels of my life, they head south. It's hard to be rejoicing in the Lord. It's hard to rejoice in anything when you're tied up in knots on the inside. Ever gone up to someone in a bad mood and pointed out their attitude wasn't just affecting their performance, it was affecting everyone's performance? They apologize, saying something like, must have gotten out of the wrong side of the bed this morning. Wouldn't it be great if when we were in a bad mood, we could just go back to bed, hop in the bed, pull up the sheets and get out on the other side and all would be well? All I know is, when I get in a bad mood, regardless of what set it off, after an hour or two, what set it off is no longer the problem. Self-pity, self-loathing, they're now the problem. It's so easy to get in a rut. And a rut is nothing more than a well-worn path and where we act out the ways that don't help us. We've just done it so many times, it just feels comfortable, but they don't help us, they actually hurt us. So we medicate through prescriptions or another way, or we overspend, or how about this one? Validation we get through posting something we know will get lots of likes. It's so easy to get some empty carbs and just throw them down our mouth. And like a prescription, they give us instant relief for a short period of time. Where they just leave us feeling bloated and sick and lousy. We're good at doing things that aren't good. And it's just as easy to not do the things that we know will help us. There has never been a day and an age where so much medical help has been freely available, and yet people still don't take advantage of it. The Annals of Internal Medicine discovered that if 100 people walk away from their doctor with a prescription in their hand, 1/3 of them will never fill it. And it's not like they didn't want to. In fact, if you'd have asked them as they were walking out of the doctor's surgery or the hospital, they would have said, yeah, I'm going to fill it out for sure. It's just things went crazy. And they just never got around to it. Out of the 67 people remaining who did fill out that prescription, half of those will never follow the orders of the bottle correctly. Meaning they'll either take them at the wrong intervals, they'll quit taking them too soon, or oftentimes as soon as they feel better, they just stop taking them. They go, I don't need them anymore. Not knowing they need their system to build up its full immunity. or they'll get their prescription filled and never take a single tablet. Astounding, isn't it? This is even true when it comes to medications to fight off organ transplant rejection. Think about this. Somebody who's been on a list and waited and gone through all that hardship and difficulty of dialysis, and now they've finally got an organ at the expense of someone who's tragically died. Yet they still fail to take the medicine properly. There is, however, one incident that defies the odds, where prescriptions are filled, taken and followed through to almost a T. And that's when the prescription is given to your pet. What does that say about our self-loathing as a society? We take better care of our animals than we take care of ourselves. There is a battle going on, and that's why I say it's time to start winning the battles. We will never be able to be at our best when we're treating ourselves the worst. It's time to come to terms with our old nature and to fight for ourselves. Do you know what many Christ followers do? When something goes wrong in their day and they find themselves in a bad mood, they don't know how to turn it around, so they just give in. It's like, today's just a write-off. It's no use trying to do anything about today. I'll just have to wait until tomorrow and hope it turns out better than today. It's like, I fell off the wagon for lunch, so I might as well binge out for dinner and have a double-layered chocolate cupcake for dinner with a Tim Tam on top. I should have had a healthy breakfast, but since I didn't, the whole day is shot. Where did this idea come from that one bad decision has to be followed by another bad decision? Maybe it comes from failing to understand something the prophet Jeremiah said 2,500 years ago. He said, "The faithful love of the Lord never ends. His mercies never cease. Great is his faithfulness. His mercies begin afresh every morning." What that verse doesn't mean is just as important as what it does mean. Jeremiah isn't saying that a new morning is the only time you have an opportunity to receive mercy. God doesn't throw out a bucket of mercy and forgiveness when the clock strikes midnight, and those who are not awake to receive it have to wait until tomorrow. Your phone data allowance with Telstra might roll over on a Pacific day, but that is not the case with the grace and mercy and empowerment that Jesus Christ offers you. You don't have to live in a mindset that, well, this day's been a bad day, thank God it's nearly over, I hope tomorrow is better. Jeremiah is saying it doesn't matter what you've done or how bad a mood you're in. God is good and you can come to him now. The writer of Hebrews says this, "Let us come boldly to the throne of our gracious God. There we will receive his mercy and we will find grace to help us when we need it most." As a wrap up, I want to give you some takeaway thoughts, and Jason is really going to follow through on this next week. You don't want to miss next week. In fact, I challenge you, share this message with someone and invite them to listen to next week. Here's my first takeaway thought. A bad mood only exists in your mind. It's the only place it exists. That's why Solomon, the wisest person who ever lived, says, "As a person thinks in his heart, so they are." A bad mood only exists in your mind. That's why Solomon, the wisest person who ever lived, said, "As a person thinks in his heart, so they are." You are what you think. And I'm not saying that every single problem in your life can be solved through mind over matter. What I am saying is what happens in your mind matters more than we care to admit. You can change the way you feel by changing the way you think. That's why we feel. The way we feel is responsible for so many of the problems we get into. So much of what we do is based on how we feel. And yet God has called us to walk by faith and not by sight. To walk by faith is, I'm going to do this because it's the right thing to do regardless of how I feel. If you want to fight the battle and take control of your mind, then you have to grab control of your emotions and change the way you think. Let me ask you some questions. When was the last time you had a negative thought that led to a positive life? Now, that never happens. Negative thoughts don't do that, do they? So choose not to camp around negative thoughts. Hey, second takeaway thought. God wants you to rule over your own spirit. As Solomon, that wisest guy that ever lived, once said, "A person without self-control is like a city with broken down walls." A city without walls was the equivalent to a hotel room without a lock, a spy hole, you know, that flippy thingamajiggy that lets the door only open a couple of inches. You wouldn't feel secure if you booked into a motel room knowing that the moment you went to sleep, there was no lock. That anyone could just walk in and take all of your stuff. That's why Nehemiah's mission to restore the walls of Jerusalem was so important. When we neglect to control our moods, we leave ourselves vulnerable to attack. If your spirit is out of control, it's difficult to live under God's control. And you do that. You want to live under God's control? You do it by changing the way you think. I'm not talking about positive thinking as a replacement for God. I'm talking about a positive thinking as a response to God. Because God's so good, I'm going to think positive, because you cannot worship and worry at the same time. You can't be accidentally negative while you're intentionally being positive. Here's my third takeaway thought. Expect battles. When you got saved, your spirit was part of you that was affected the most. A transaction took place. Your sin was replaced with the righteousness of Jesus Christ. Listen to what Ezekiel said. And I will give you a new heart. And I'll put in you a new spirit. I will take out stony, stubborn heart and give you a tender, responsive heart. But that doesn't mean that you're not going to struggle with moodiness and desires that are 100% outside of God's plan and purpose for your life. You know, I don't know how many parents have sent a teenager away to a youth camp and they found out that the teenager had an incredible encounter with God at that camp. Got baptized in the Holy Spirit, got saved, prayer language, the whole deal. And they thought, oh, they're going to be so different. They're home just with them one day. And that grumpy nature came out again. Their spirit has been changed, but it's going to take a long time for their mind and their desires to catch up with God's doing in their spirit. Hey, last takeaway thought. It's a prelude to where we're going to pick up next week. Bad things happen when you put a negative where a positive is supposed to be. Hey, think that through. Bad things happen when you put a negative where a positive is supposed to be. Hey, God bless. Looking forward so much to catching up with you soon.
Thank you for joining us online at Runcorn Christian Church. We're continuing to grow our online presence, so please check in frequently on our website and social media platforms to stay up to date with the latest services that we have available. Make sure you subscribe to this channel so you don't miss a single video. To support the ongoing work of Runcorn Christian Church and partner in our vision, we'd like to invite you to give electronically. You can make a direct debit transfer using the account details that are on the screen and also on our webpage. Thank you again for joining us today, and God bless.